in one of your other presentations, you discuss how much a dialect must diverge from a language in order to be considered a language of its own. How would a dialect become an ICH without avoiding or creating political boundaries between regions?
That's a very good question, which I have never heard before. And to start with, I do accept Weinreich's definition that in Yiddish he said, a Sprach is a dialect mit an Armee und a Flot. So a language, this is in Yiddish, which is a Jewish language, a mixed language of Eastern Europe. You can see that it has some German in it, but not only. So a language is a dialect with an army and a fleet or navy. Of course, this is relevant to countries where you have an ocean, like Korea, like South Korea. So, I mean, if you're a country without an ocean, then you don't need a navy, you just need an army. But of course, some people later on, this was like 70 years ago, some people later on rephrase it as a language is a dialect with a flag. A language is a dialect with intellectual sovereignty. A language is a dialect with cultural autonomy. A language is a dialect with a political anthem, etc., etc. I think this is a wonderful question, because what you are saying is that if you employ Weinreich's idea, then ipso facto, language as opposed to dialect has some tangible components, as opposed to dialects which do not have tangible components. For example, dialect, let's say in Furlan or Friuli, in the northern part of Italy, northeastern part, many people regard it as a dialect, not as a language, even though when I would say something in Furlan and you speak Italian, you will understand nothing. For example, se tu vens casutas cretis lacelor mian soterat, alum splat splendiste lutis dal mio sancle stat bagnat. That's a dialect of Italian. Well, not too many Italians would understand that. But Furlan or Friulian is not considered by many a language because it's not the Friulian nation or Friulian state or Friulian army, etc. When it comes to intangibility, I think that we should not care too much about the distinction between a language and a dialect, because the distinction is very much dependent on things that are irrelevant for the harmonious nature of society. You know, whether or not you have an army. Well, if you don't want to have an army, then okay, you will just have a dialect. Okay, so it will be intangible. But then if you want to have an army, well, will it just become tangible? No, I think that languages and dialects and varieties should all be defined as intangible. When we talk about the Chinese language, you know, like what is Chinese language? We are talking about 10 different languages, and we are talking about hundreds of dialects of these 10 different languages. On the other hand, when you talk about Arabic, you know, I mean, we are talking about many Arabics. So yeah, you can say the Fusha or the modern standard Arabic is, or the Hochdeutsch in German, you know, the High German, or the literary language is one language that is common to all the educated Arabs. But then if you are an Iraqi Arab, your language as Iraqi Arabic should be as important as the Fusha. And when you're an Egyptian Arab, your Egyptian Arabic should be as important as the Fusha, etc. So we should, and of course, Iraqi Arabic has many dialects, etc. So I think that in order not to confuse ourselves with what is tangible and what is intangible, should we include only the dialects under ICH and not the official languages? No, because sometimes the official languages are actually based on a specific dialect. I mean, you look at Italian, it is based on the Sienese or Tuscan language, etc. So there is no reason why not to also include it as intangible, as of course Neapolitan from Napoli, etc. So I think that the distinction between language and dialect tells us that it is not that important when we discuss intangibility. It is important when we discuss politics, but under intangible heritage, we should focus on culture rather than internal or external politics, which often are associated with, again, strife and trouble and strife.